Do you want a surefire way to break your heart and empty your pockets? File a custody modification. That's not what you thought I was going to say, right? I'm a divorce and family lawyer who does custody modifications for my job. But the thing is, I'm not going to suggest that you go down this road unless it's basically your only option. I can say that because I speak from experience. I've been through two. And you might want to take the advice of someone who's been there, done that, got the t-shirt. And it's different than a divorce. You've already been through it, okay? When you go to a custody modification, you're familiar with the legal process. So there's not this whole like, oh, wow, everything is new. Like, what's court? What's a judge? How does that work? You are old hat at that stuff. We're members of a different club. And it is expensive and hard to get what you want. And often it's still the only choice. But what I'm going to suggest you do is try pretty much literally anything else. Like, can you go to the other parent and reason with them? If your kids are old enough, can you wait it out? Can you get there by a different way? If you've tried all of that and it still won't work, look, good dads and good moms do what we have to do to protect our children. And often it's the solution. You need the court to get involved. You need the court to help you protect and provide for your children. It's just that they get really expensive because look, when you start the case, you know there's going to be a fight. You know that you're going to probably end up in court because otherwise you would have already figured this out. Versus like, remember when you do a divorce? In that, a lot of times people come to an agreement and just settle on terms. But when we're talking about only our children and that's it, there's not a lot of gray area. There's not a lot of room in between. So proceed with caution. If you're going to file a custody modification in the state of Texas, it's sometimes the only option, but I really need you to think it through before you hire somebody who's like, oh yeah, custody mod, let's go. If they're that easy and that yes about it, you really need to think twice before you go with that attorney so that they fully appreciate the way this will affect your actual real life, your actual children, your actual money. If you file a custody modification in the state of Texas, you need to be prepared to open up an entire can of worms, probably bigger than you can even imagine. And here's what I mean. The first thing that's going to happen is every action has an equal or greater reaction. So when you file a custody modification on this one little issue, like perhaps about what time you do pickups on the weekends, what's she going to do? What's he going to do? Are they going to modify to change child support? To change possession entirely? And so you need to think through like that little phrase, we don't bring a knife to a gunfight. Like hopefully you're not really going to any knife or gunfights, but the idea is don't show up on some little bitty thing it's important, but it's not essential because you may open up an entire can of worms and find yourself losing what you already have when it comes to your kids' money, different decision-making rights, possession, time with them, things like that. The other can of worms you may open up is a financial can of worms. Look, filing a custody modification is expensive. You know there's already going to be a fight. You know you two are not in agreement. And what that means is probably time in the courtroom, perhaps on temporary orders, maybe a final trial. You may even go before a jury, and you need to add quite a few zeros after the numbers to think about how much something like that's going to cost. So proceed with caution if you're going to try to file a custody modification for child custody in the state of Texas, because you may open up a giant can of worms. So my advice is always to proceed with caution if you are considering a child custody modification for child custody in the state of Texas. But you may be saying, Hannah, okay, so proceed with caution. Like, what does that practically mean? We need to adjust the pickup time to account for the basketball practice, and he or she won't agree. What do I do? Here's the thing. Probably you're just going to have to deal with it. You're probably going to work around it the best that you can, and probably your kid's going to suffer. A lot of lawyers won't tell you that. They'll tell you, oh, we can file a custom mod and try to do something about it. Or they may just like not take your call whenever you call them. I don't know. And there's probably some really great lawyers, of course, that'll tell you like, you're going to have to just suck that up. But ultimately, you're probably not going to file a custody modification, spend a fortune, and open up an entire can of worms or what they may try to get over like a basketball pickup time. And this happens all the time. People are like, it's not fair. It's not right. The kids are suffering. Yes, they do. They are. And unfortunately, the reality is, unless things get a lot worse, there's really probably not a lot you can do to deal with it except to work around the situation the best you can. Even though my advice is to proceed with caution when it comes to filing a child custody modification for child custody in the state of Texas, sometimes it is the right answer for you and your family. And I want you to think about this idea of material. And in the law, we talk a lot about whether something is material. And in fact, the standard why, like how a judge will decide whether or not you can even bring a custody modification is if the request you're asking for constitutes a material and substantial change in circumstances. So let's focus on this idea of material, because to me, like if it's material, it's probably substantial. They kind of go together. But is it material? Is what you're wanting to accomplish essential? Absolutely necessary for the interest of your kids. And I want you to think in terms of a good one that comes up is like, say two parties have joint decision-making rights because they're joint managing conservators when it comes to medical decisions for a child. There are a lot of orders that'll say this because in mediation, the mediator and your lawyer are like, oh, just joint rights, right? Right. And you're like, right, I guess. Because you don't have me fighting tooth and nail to not get those joint rights if there's anything that I can do about it. But anyway, that's a whole different thing. So you've got these joint decision-making rights when it comes to medical decisions. And then you take your child to the pediatrician. And the pediatrician says, I think we need to get this kiddo to a psychologist. There's some issues going on that we need to look into. And you want to make an appointment with the psychologist, and your X factor co-parent says, no, I don't think they need that. I don't think they need any of that medication stuff. And they won't let you. Now what? You're at a juggernaut. Who's going to give here? And when it comes to protecting your kid's medical best interest, you're going to do something. That's a good reason to file a custody modification. If a pediatrician says your kid needs some extra help, they're suffering, and in your heart of hearts, you know they may need some additional help from a counselor, a therapist, a psychiatrist, and your ex won't let you because they won't agree, that may be the sort of thing that would be grounds for a child custody modification because it's material. Without the court's help, the child will suffer. Now, contrast this medical decision making to like they won't let the kids sign up for cheerleading. Okay? That's not the best. Would you file a child custody modification over that? That may depend. Like, has your kiddo been doing cheerleading since she was 3 years old and now she's 15 and they won't let her sign up because maybe it requires like both parents' consent or the meets are going to be on their time or something like that, and y'all have to agree on extracurriculars? Closer call. Is it material? Well, it depends. Is your child going to suffer? How old is your kiddo? How important is this to them? What does a counselor say? What does their teacher say? So that's how you kind of build the case. It's a closer call. So each one of the circumstances where you might think about filing a child custody modification, you're going to proceed with caution, and the facts need to be material and impact the children before you move forward. And the best way to figure out whether what's going on in your life is enough to justify filing the modification is really to talk to a lawyer who's experienced in these matters, particularly in the court you will be in front of, to give you a feel for how a judge might rule on any particular issue based on how they've ruled in the past. One question we get online all the time involves when a mother says, hey, look, the kid's dad is not picking them up and taking them during their time, like it says he's supposed to in the divorce decree or the custody orders. Does that mean I can have full custody now? Well, not necessarily, no. Here's the deal. Possession and access, custody, parenting time, whatever you want to call it, is a right, not an obligation. And this is a little bit hard to swallow and stomach, and it doesn't feel great, but it just is. A divorce decree's parenting schedule allows the non primary parent the right to have the child during those times, like first, third, and fifth weekend, but not the obligation. So if they don't show up, it's not like the cops are going to come get your kids and take them over there or get them in trouble because they don't show up. Now, that's future evidence of why maybe they shouldn't be the primary parent if they tried to file a custody modification. Or if it goes on long enough and happens enough times and like affects your kids, that might be a grounds to file the child custody modification. And the theory would go something like, hey, judge, for the last 2 years, the dad has shown up like once or twice, and the kid waits every Friday thinking dad's going to come and they don't come. And what we really need is for the paperwork to match the reality of the situation. So the key factor there before I was going to file a child custody modification would be whether it's gone on for a substantial period of time, but like they missed a Friday, they missed a couple weekends here and there. No, that's not going to be grounds for a modification. You're just going to have more time with your kid. But at the same time, I understand that if your co parent never picks up the kids, that's a lot more on you. That's a lot more time, a lot more meals. You don't ever get a break. And especially if the kids are little, when you're in those like hard years of having little kids, you really could kind of use the weekend off sometimes. It's not to say it's not tough. And I want you to put that in your mental memory bank, or hopefully you're keeping a journal of all of these things that happen as something you could use in the future if you need it to protect the rights that you already have.